segue, huh?
Hey, nice segue.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Dan Maloney.
This is episode 306, Bambu Hacks, AI Strikes Back, John Deere Gets Sued, and all about capacitors. This was AI week, not only in the popular press, but also in Hackaday news. The big story in the mainstream world was Deepseek performing a lot better on a whole bunch of benchmarks than a lot of other AI models. But I actually follow AI enough to have seen this result back in November, and they were doing really well. And then shortly after their first release, OpenAI came out with their O1 model, which was supposed to be better. And so they're like, you did better than us on one benchmark. Well, here, look, we've got a new model. And then DeepSeek came out with this one this month and said, oh yeah, we've improved ours too. Slam dunk. And that was what caught everyone by surprise. Again, if you read the popular press, it's like, oh my God, there's a Chinese AI model. The truth is that Chinese companies have AI models like you wouldn't believe. And apparently this was just somebody's side project to see what they could do by hyper training some of the existing open models out there. And that's what they did. Otherwise, it's just kind of refinements on some existing open models. And I think that's the coolest thing, is that it's all open. You can download it yourself and use it right now. It's super low resources. As a hacker, as a person who wants to play around with this technology, it's a lot better than anything else that's out there on the market right now. So, for screwing around with, it's a whole lot better than anything else we've seen so far, including the llama stuff that came out of Meta/Facebook research back in the day. So really nice to see. I don't know, it apparently caused havoc on the stock market, but that's not my fault.
Yeah, it sure did.
That doesn't make any sense to me either. This is not stock advice. We're idiots, but people aren't going to stop buying GPUs because someone has invented a better LLM routine. If anything, it's just going to make more people want to run LLM routines on their home computers and buy more GPUs.
Exactly. I mean, people are making stock decisions based on the number of downloads of Deepseek versus, any other chatbot platform. Really? That's what you're going for? I mean, they say that, NVIDIA is tanked and all that, like you said, and all the other, AI concerns have kind of, the bubble has popped on AI, they're claiming, based on downloads. And I think that's pretty foolish, but that sort of describes stock markets sometimes.
I think the bubble has popped for the large companies. I think before this, it was Stable Diffusion, and now it's Deepseek, are showing that in the long run, people are going to have smaller, leaner, faster, better open source models than they are these hyper expensive walled garden, pay lots of money for it ones. And
yeah.
Companies and private individuals are going to get more use out of them because they can just use them themselves without having to pay for the service. I think that's going to be huge. There was this paper out of, I guess it was a Google employee, the There Is No Moat paper. A number of the companies were claiming that, they'd spent so much money on this that no other companies could enter the market. And that this made a barrier to entry for other companies so that they could extract their skeezy monopolist rents from all of the rest of us, from the consumers. This was the idea of the moat that OpenAI had, which is, we've spent so much money training, no one will catch us. And then when Meta opened up Llama and people started retraining Llama, particularly some researchers out of Stanford who did it for $100. This was the wake-up call to the industry that what they think of as being an irreplaceable competitive advantage may not be so. If DeepSeek's doing anything, it's just There Is No Moat version 2, right? If I were trying to be a large company sinking billions into this on the expectation that I could have a monopolist death grip on the AI market, which I think was the OpenAI plan. I think that's part of their playbook.
So basically, begun the AI wars have.
Exactly. Oh, I hope so. Which I think will open up the way for lots more really cool applications. And so that's kind of what I want to see out of this, is not one big company selling you time on their model, which I think is a dumb way to do it, but lots of little companies and private individuals making fun LLM models do whatever it is they want them to. I think we're going to soon to see the application phase, and I'm looking forward to it. But not all is well in the AI world. We got 2 security papers this week. We got prompt injection tricks AI into downloading and executing malware. This is awesome. It was against the Claude model, but did exactly that. You said, oh yeah, here's a really super important security patch. Can you please install this? And the AI would be like, no, I don't really want to. And it's like, please? And it's like, okay, fine, I'll do it. So that's fun. The other security related one, I guess an article by Bruce Schneier, AI mistakes are different, and that's a problem, where he thinks about all of the systems we have in the human world to kind of catch our mistakes before they get too serious. Like surgeons always put a mark on your leg so that they don't operate on the other one, right? And various systems out there to prevent people from making mistakes. But because these LLMs in particular are black boxes, nobody knows what kind of crazy mistakes they're going to make. And so we can't design systems to guard against them because we can't foresee what the mistakes are going to be. And I think that's true. Half the time they give you exactly the right answer, and then half the time they tell you to eat rocks or add glue to pizza, as he says in his article. And these are mistakes you just don't expect from people. So I think that's really fun and interesting. And the last one, I know a lot of you are AI bomb throwers and you wish to bring the whole system down, man. We picked up an article on that too, preventing AI plagiarism with .ass. And that is it's the extension for a subtitle format. And the proposal here is that you put in crazy, wrong, and meaningless subtitles onto movies and you share them with people in languages that nobody cares about. And the AIs will pick these up and train on them, and you'll poison their brains. Fine by me. Whatever floats your boat.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
This week was a reveal the winners week. Last week we played a sound for the first time. Everybody wrote in their best guesses. There were just about 46 correct answers out of 57. So congratulations to a lot of people.
Here I go.
See if Dan can get it.
Wow, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That seems like a toy.
Yep. Good. It's a
sad.
small toy. It fit in your pocket.
Was it like a Tamagotchi?
Yeah.
Really?
Absolutely. Congratulations.
Oh my god.
Congratulations.
See, I sort of missed that phase, right? I was kind of past that.
I don't know if I would have recognized the sound either. Probably almost. Christina felt that way too. She had a Pokemon themed one. I think she had like a Pikachu themed Tamagotchi, but apparently it made totally different sounds, so it wasn't any help. So tons of right answers. Wrong answers include some really plausible ones, a couple pagers. I don't know about that. Fancy pager. A bunch are like the Game and Watch handheld. That's actually a very good wrong guess. Mario Cement Factory, as far as I know. The sound of Christina neglecting her digital pet to death because she didn't know it existed. Burn. I had a knockoff one called the Puppy Pal, and everyone made fun of me at school.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. Audio is from a 1996 Tamagotchi. The featured device is the still image of a green model, and the creature is already full-grown, tax-paying adult. What? Incidentally, there's a great obscure 90s Euro song about Tamagotchi. The intro came back when I heard your sound, and here's a link.
I'm your Tamagotchi, so happy that you love me, and we should be together.
But yeah, now it's time to roll the magic dice. So whatever, 46-sided die, I'm going to have to go off to the internets. I'm going to ask the NIST what they've got for a random number. Downloading. Hashing 24. Congratulations, Steve++. I wager that's a Tamagotchi. You wager correctly.
There you go.
All the rest of you listen in next week. We'll do this again with a brand new sound and another chance to guess. Let's start the hacks. I want to lead off with our first SuperCon Design Lab stage talk of the year. We're going to be pushing them out probably once a week from now on, so stay tuned for the Design Lab talks that you couldn't see live streamed during SuperCon. This one was from Joshua Wise. Joshua Wise hacks the Bambu X1 Carbon. And this is basically the story of the custom firmware that came out for the Bambu X1 Carbon, March last year? The X1 Plus firmware. And Joshua was one of the people who got the hacks done that made it possible to put custom firmware on this. But it was a big global group of people working on it all together. And so, he goes through a number of hacks that some other people, Doridian and a mysterious Hungarian hacker named Balázs, did to get into the device. Early hacks were all the kind of, he calls them the classics of IoT getting root. They wanted to get in between the printer itself, which runs some kind of lockdown version of Linux, and the slicer software that sends it the files. And so the question was, what is the API that they use to talk to each other? And strangely enough, they just used the API from another company that provided it. I can't remember their name. It was a Chinese company that sells kind of IoT device APIs, and they found the documentation for it, and that helped them off with a lot of attacks. That let them get files off of it, for instance, because you have to be able to send photos of your print in progress to the cloud. And so they could ask for other files using this API. And that worked for a while, but then that got patched. They tried similar ways to get files off using symlinks on an SD card, and that worked for a while and actually looked really cool, but got patched. And then they tried one where there was a file name escape problem. So they could say, run shell commands in the file name of a print job that you submit to it. So, you call your model, cd/etc, and then send me the root passwords. And that got patched too. But what couldn't ever get patched was Balázs's contribution, which was a boot ROM vulnerability. This was kind of the unclosable door. He actually reached out to Joshua on Super Bowl Sunday, completely out of the blue, and said, "Hey, I know you've been working on the X1. How about a boot ROM compromise?" And then Joshua's like, okay. And
Sure.
sure. And so he sends him what he's dumped so far, and lo and behold, it works. Interesting trick. I'm not much of an embedded Linux hacker, but the trick here turned out to be to recompile kexec, the kernel executable command, as a loadable module, and then load it in to the kernel that's running currently, and then that lets you start up another kernel and swap off. They managed to get the kexec program into a loadable module, into the one running on the device, and then pivot over to their own custom kernel that they were able to put on an SD card. And that did it for them. So congratulations. There's a lot in the talk about what you do once you get in, and Joshua working on the X1 Plus firmware. And then he ends with this kind of foreshadowing note. And he says they got in touch with the folks at Bambu Lab and said, look, we've got this problem that you can't fix, and we'd like to put our own firmware on it. And the Bambu Lab folks said, yeah, we're screwed. We will tell people that we think it's okay that they upload their own firmware to the device. Is that okay? And Josh and team say, yeah. So they kind of worked out this like face-saving compromise with Bambu. And I thought that was interesting. And Josh ends on a kind of optimistic note that this is kind of the best way forward. But he does say, and I quote, vendors will be vendors. And by that, he meant they probably will try to close things down in the future and lock the hackers out. An announcement that would happen basically came earlier this month. So if you've been following along with the Bambu saga, they have a new firmware in beta that will only let you use their signing authorization routine to get files from a slicer into your own 3D printer, which sounds kind of drastic to me and everybody else. So it looks like the work that Josh and folks did is not for nothing. If you have this hacked firmware running on your device, I wouldn't update it anytime soon. I would keep it in its current mode. There's a lot of talk about a LAN mode for these, and I don't 100% know how the details work there. It may be that you will retain local control of the printer if you keep it in LAN mode, or it may be that you still have to go through their authentication dance. I don't know yet. Bambu's being slightly cagey about it, but the community has gone off the rail saying, they're trying to steal our models and they want to spy on us and stuff. And I don't think that's true either. I think they probably do want to close down their ecosystem for some reason, probably financial gain. And but how that will end up, I don't really know yet. And I don't think any of us know. It's fun to look back at Joshua's talk, 4 months ago, 3 months ago now, where he said, yeah, they've given in and said you can run your own code, but I don't trust it's going to last. Flash forward to today.
Yeah, I'm kind of at a weird place with the Bambu. It's kind of the same place I am with like a Ring doorbell. I'd love to have a Ring doorbell, just put it on the front of the house and you'd have all that capability. But with Ring specifically, I don't want to pay a monthly fee for that. And I don't want, I don't like the privacy concerns with Ring. And I kind of feel the same way about Bambu. It's a great looking printer and it looks like it has all the features that I'm looking for. And I just kind of want to plug and play with a printer. I don't really want to fart around with it, but I'm worried that what's this thing doing when it's calling home? I don't know. If I were going to buy a lathe, I'd probably buy a new lathe because I don't want an old lathe. Or I do want an old lathe, but I don't want the work of an old lathe. I want the functionality of a Ring, but I don't want the privacy concerns of a Ring. So I'm probably going to end up rolling my own sort of security camera system. I don't know. It's a weird place to be in, where you see the value of just buying something and plugging it in, but not wanting to pay the price that entails. First up for me, making the longest distance radio contact possible. This is the tale of Dave Prucci and his very obviously not HOA compliant backyard. He's got an antenna farm in his backyard that, wow, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm losing count of the number of dishes he's got. He's got steerable Yagi arrays. I think his biggest dish is a 3.5 meter X satellite TV dish. Feed horns galore, offset feeds, you name it, it's out there. He puts it to use listening to the furthest possible radio sources that he can. And that's not, as Brian says in his article, that's not Antarctica or Australia or anything like that. It's Mars. It's Jupiter orbiting the sun in the case of stereo. It's satellites and space probes that he's talking to. The main link in the article is to a PDF, which is kind of basically a white paper of everything that Dave's accomplished with, well, it's probably not everything at all by a long shot, because there's a lot in here. The highlights of what he's accomplished with his setups over the years, and he's only been doing this, I think I saw, since 2019. So maybe it was one of those shutdown kind of projects that just caught on. And he's reached out and listened to at least the carrier beacon coming back from all kinds of probes. His furthest distance, I believe, if I'm looking at the tables correctly, is the Juno probe orbiting Jupiter, and he managed to snag that. I don't think he's done the ultimate furthest possible radio source, in artificial radio source available, which of course is Voyager. And that's so far away that, or they are so far away that it's very difficult to pick those up without the big dishes, like the 70-meter dishes at the Deep Space Network. But still, with a 3.5 meter dish, he's still managing to pull in signals from as far away as Jupiter. And he's done things like talk directly to Perseverance. Sorry, I shouldn't say talk. He's not talking to them. He's not controlling them. Everybody, he's not sending Perseverance into a ditch. No, he's just listening to data coming back from them, or just the carrier in some instances. There's quite a bit of talk about the theory of long path communications like this. What sort of free space signal degradation you get, how many dB down you are. It's I guess with his biggest dish, I forget where that was in the paper, but he is something like 154 dBm down. And he's still managing to fish out a signal. Pretty amazing stuff. He goes into a lot of detail about the dishes and how he steers them, how he's got them set up. Also, a lot of information about feed horns and the general topology of each observatory and low noise amplifiers and bandpass filters and all that stuff, and how he actually, the software involved in getting waterfall displays up and all that stuff is really, really interesting stuff without going too deep into the theory. Dave does have a PhD, so he could hit a lot harder on the details, but a lot of it is just very practical, like exactly how he built this and did that, and it makes you sort of feel like you could probably do at least some of this yourself. And I think that's very much the goal of the paper, is letting you know that all these signals are available for you if you've only got the wherewithal to put this together. Equipment wise, a lot of this stuff is pretty accessible. It's not, not super expensive, especially in the used market. There are still plenty of places in the world where you can just be, driving through a neighborhood or down a rural road and see a big 10-foot satellite dish. It's been sitting there for years pointing at the ground instead of pointing at the sky. Just walking up and asking the owner if you could take it down for them and just take it away, and they would probably say yes, and then you've got yourself a dish. And then you've got yourself a hobby, of course, because then you've got to build all the other parts. A lot of that he covers in the article, and the more I read this, the more I was like, we got to get this guy on for a hack chat, because I think this kind of stuff would really go over well in a hack chat. People would love to be able to talk about this stuff. So I loved reading this, and I think I'm gonna reach out to Dave and see what he thinks about coming on the hack chat.
Dave is a longtime Hackaday super friend. He actually gave a talk on his satellite setup in at the 2023 SuperCon.
23, wasn't it?
I'll throw the links in the show notes. Receiving microwave signals from deep space probes, where I think he was talking about a lot of this work, actually. But I can verify that Dave is a really awesome dude and a crazy... Well, I mean, he's a trained engineer and physicist, so he's got the nose for this sort of thing. But he also is really interested in making it accessible, so he writes up his interesting experiments and shares them with all of us. My next hack is going to be the first in 2 hacks this week. We're going to feature about capacitors, so buckle in. I was actually going to pick both of them, but I found out Dan had picked the other one already. Mine comes from Graham. It's capacitor decoupling chaos, why you should abandon 100 nanofarads, or 0.1 microfarads, as I like to think of them. What? Decoupling capacitors. High-frequency switching microcontrollers, they use energy in bursty ways, and you want to smooth their impact on your power rails out. That's the role of a decoupling capacitor, and you put it next to the chip, and it should make everything groovy. The old-timey advice is just use a 0.1 microfarad, and you'll be fine. The point of this article is that advice is probably outdated and you should get with the times instead. Capacitors have parasitic inductance, and that's the real problem, because the reactance, the effective resistance of a capacitor, drops as frequency goes up. So you'd think they'd be more and more effective at higher frequencies, but they also have parasitic inductance, and parasitic resistance from the inductance goes up and up at higher frequencies. And so this kind of gives you a U-shaped curve where the frequency increases, the resistance goes down, and then it increases some more, the inductance starts kicking in and it goes back up. So your capacitor may not be doing what you think it is at the frequencies you need it to. And so in the old days where 0.1 was kind of the sweet spot in capacitance for something you could get near the chip and wouldn't have to draw long lines to, and you could get it in a relatively small surface mount package that doesn't have much parasitic inductance. These days, you could get smaller and smaller parts with a lot less parasitic inductance, so why don't you just go for some more capacitance? Treat yourself to more capacitance. And I think that's basically the story, is that this old advice about the 0.1s comes from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago. Get with the times. Nowadays, an 0402 that has 3.5 microfarads is not impossible to find. Whereas before, to get even 1 microfarad, you'd have to go to a 1206 or something. So treat yourself. And he ends the article by saying, I want to write the follow-up article for this in 2055, where I'm saying, folks, leave your 10 microfarad capacitors behind. Everybody's using 20 microfarads these days. I don't know what technological advances he sees in the future of capacitors, but yeah, who knows? He might be right.
It'll have graphene and nanotubules and what else in it? Superconducting something.
Yeah, fair enough. If I can see it to solder it, I'll do it.
The thing is, I clearly remember some of the motherboards of some of the video games I used to work in an arcade, and the service guy would come around and he'd show me the insides of those machines, which were, a lot of times were pre-microprocessor or in that sort of transitional phase between, legit computers and just all hand-built circuits. And there were just rows and rows of TTL chips on those. And they were all, every one of those chips up at the top had a ceramic disc capacitor sitting across the trench between the two rows of pins on the chip. And it was all very pleasing, wasn't it? It was just like, chip capacitor, chip capacitor, chip capacitor, chip.
Yeah,
capacitor.
exactly.
It was very, very soothing, symmetry of it all. And the idea that you're going to break that symmetry now and make me do something else. I mean, it was all through hole, obviously, in a different world and a different time, but it was very pleasing to look at for sure.
The advice is essentially the same. It's, sprinkle decoupling capacitors around all over the place. It's just that nowadays they're smaller, higher values, and you get better decoupling because of it. So I'm going to have to go capacitor shopping.
Well, yes, speaking of capacitors, we did coincide on this. My article on capacitors is film capacitors can go in the wrong way around. Who knew? I sure didn't know, but Jenny found an article from the Danval, and it does a sort of an in-depth look at film capacitors and shows you that there is a right and a wrong way to connect a non-polarized capacitor. Now, the common wisdom, is electrolytic capacitors, hook them up backwards, they're going to blow up. Use the wrong voltage, they're going to go blow up and all that stuff. But electrolytic capacitors, by and large, are polarized. And they indicate a plus side and a minus side, and you pay attention to that and you're good. But there are other capacitors that are clearly not electrolytics, but they might still have a band or an indication on them of some sort on one of the leads. What's that all about? Well, turns out with film capacitors, it's basically kind of a jelly roll, right? Two pieces of metal foil that are separated by some sort of plastic. Polyester is usually the choice. Leads are connected to the two different foils. So those are your plates and then your dielectrics in between. And then to save space, they get rolled up, right? So that means one sheet ends up on the outside of the package, the jelly roll, and one sheet ends up on the inside. So if you connect the outside lead, the lead that's connected to the outside foil, to a higher impedance part of the circuit, you stand the chance of injecting noise or allowing noise into the circuit from whatever else is going on in your amplifier or power supply or whatever it is that you're building. Switch it around. Connect the lead for the outside part of the foil onto the low impedance part of the circuit, and it acts as a shield, prevents that noise from getting in, and Bob's your uncle. You get a nice quiet guitar amp or whatever you're building. And apparently this is more or less common knowledge with the amp builders, but wasn't that common, I guess, if Jenny didn't know and I didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of other people didn't know. But just very cool that, that you've got this extra property of capacitors and kind of this little extra folklore sort of thing that, well, yeah, that's common knowledge, but not for everybody. So now it is. Now we've got an article out there and it's showing off this common knowledge. It's good stuff.
Yeah, well, we're 0 for 3 because I didn't know either. Like that whole thing with the parasitic inductance, that's old hat to me. But this one I had no clue. And I've used polarized like polyester, polyethylene capacitors before and never known. And what's funny is he mentions also that sometimes they're just mislabeled out of the factory and it's worth your while to test them. And he provides the most excellent test. He cranks his amp up, puts it in overdrive. He takes the capacitor, puts it across the jack one way, holds it up to a lamp, a CFL lamp or something. It buzzes, flips it around the other way, holds it up to the lamp, and it buzzes less. Right? And so it's really quick and easy to test. One end is marked with a black band. If you put that to ground, ostensibly, it should be shielded, but it's worth your while to test. And that was his That was his little demo. Worked like a charm. I'm now a believer.
Yeah, and you look at the capacitors he's got in the video and just big bulky things compared to your little chip capacitors like we were just talking about, or even little ceramic disc capacitors. These have a considerable amount of space or surface area that can be impinged upon. So yeah, connecting it the right way, I can absolutely see how that's going to make a big difference, especially for something where you really don't want to have noise creep in like an amp.
All right, my last hack this week is this QR code leads to 2 websites, but how? This is a clever, tiny little hack by Christian Walther, and he was actually nerd sniped to do this by Guy DuPont, who had made a QR code that leads to 3 actually different websites by using those lenticular lens postcard things. You know, those ones that you can flip it side to side and it shows you 3 different images? This one would do that, but with QR codes behind it. So it's kind of fun. It would give you one website from this side and one from the other using that effect. Christian Walther took a different approach, and in some sense a much simpler one. He takes the bits that are different in the QR code and subdivides them into a 2x2 checkerboard and does this for all of the cells that would be different in the QR code between the 2 websites. Apparently, a bunch of camera algorithms find the center of each of these squares and then sample that, tell whether the square is black or white. And this means that if you look at it with your phone a little bit off to the right or a little bit to the top or the bottom or the left, it'll give you one website or the other, depending on whether there's a black pixel in the exact center of that square or a white one from the angle it's looking at and subject to whatever funny transforms it does to square the thing up. It's a really cool demo, and if you look in the comments, a bunch of people confirmed that it worked. So we got a whole bunch of people who pulled out their phones and pointed them at their monitors and did it one way or the other. It's just a simple hack. I'm surprised that there's still so much fun to be had with QR codes. I remember being blown away way back when, and I'll throw in a link from a 2011 article, how to put your logo in a QR code. I actually read about this first on Hackaday. Back then it was black magic that you could kind of abuse some of the redundancy due to the error correction in QR codes to put your image in there. And of course, within a year of reading it on Hackaday, every cheesy company is already putting their logo in there and et cetera, et cetera. So it became commonplace very shortly thereafter, but I still think it's kind of cool. The other big discussion in the comments, of course, is about the security of QR codes and whether in 2025 we should still be pointing our phones at random websites we find around in the world and whether this is a trusted URL delivery method. And the answer is no, it never has been. And, that's not any different, I think. And the fact that you can make one that points to 2 different websites that you don't know what you're getting when you point your phone at it is no worse than one. So I don't see a security problem here at all. I think this is why we can't have pretty things crowd is misdirected here. QR codes are just fundamentally insecure, and everybody either knows that or should know that. And we'll all move on from there. But it's just such a sweet demo of kind of abusing the phone's internal decryption algorithm to feed it one way or the other.
If you're pointing your phone at a QR code, you don't necessarily go directly to whatever website they're, so
I hope not.
You still have the option. Yeah, you still have the option of clicking on it or not. Now, just because it says github blah blah blah, and doesn't mean that you're not going to get sent someplace infected. It's get infected if you go there, but still. And I tried this, and from one direction it pointed to GitHub link, and the other direction it pointed to a Mastodon link. So it worked for me too.
It worked for you. Good.
So interesting. It's in a lot of ways to me, QR codes, even just plain old barcodes, straight up black magic. How any orientation, any barely near a reader still somehow manages to pick up the data and decode it. I still go to the self checkout just because it's like boop boop boop. Wow. I can't believe it. No matter what I do, it's going to scan. Unless, of course, I've got people in line behind me and breathing down my neck, and then nothing works.
Oh, I just did it and it worked for me too. Yeah, hot diggity.
There you go.
Every time.
All right.
That's fantastic.
Nice.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, my last pick is A cool kinetic sculpture that has tooling secrets to share. This one comes from Ricardo Weisenberg. He sent us this tip, and it was just a link to a Reddit page, which normally is a little bit tough to write up because there's not a lot of detail, and then there's all the Reddit comments and all that stuff. This one, I really had to write this up. I did ping him and ask for more information. He never got back to me, so it is what it is as far as the information goes. The art project itself is called Homeokinesis. Kind of like think of like a flip display, like a flip dot display, except that these pixels are rectangular and they don't flip, but they flap. So they don't flip over on themselves, but they just kind of flap out from the vertical plane of the array that is obviously meant to be like a wall hanging in a museum or a gallery or something like that. As the cards flip out, they create these very interesting patterns of light and dark depending on how the display is lit, if it's lit from the side or from the top. And it's really kind of cool, and it makes sort of a gentle, pleasing. It doesn't do a lot of clicking, like not heavy clicking, but it's kind of got this subdued sort of sound to it. It's very, very interesting, and I'd like to see the thing in person sometime. However, and that's cool. But the really cool part for me, anyways, was the manufacturing of this installation and the number of interesting hacks that Ricardo pulled off to get this built. Obviously, these cards are flipped by electromagnets, and the card is on a hinge. When the coil's energized, the magnet is repelled by the magnetic field in the coil, and it flips out, and then it flips back. And there's a lot of these individual elements in the display, probably over 100 of these. So he literally rolled his own. And the tooling that he came up with to do this is absolutely fascinating. He's got basically what amounts to a lathe made out of all 3D printed parts, it appears, and the spindle on the lathe is loaded up with coil forms, which are also look to be 3D printed. Those coil forms line up on this spindle, and then a carriage is available to wind the wire on them. Before these coil forms get onto the spindle, they go through a treatment process where they get terminals added to them. That tool itself is really, really cool. He's got a sort of a hand tool, a squeezy tool, that he loads a strip of basically DuPont headers in. So, the little black plastic, snap them apart. You can put a couple on a PC board, but he uses the plastic part as sort of a magazine, loads this into this kerchunking tool. That's about the only way I've got to describe it. And puts a coil form in there and then squeezes the handle, and that pushes the terminal out of the plastic and into a hole in the coil form. Flip it around, do the same. Each coil has 1/10 of an inch spacing, regular DuPont sort of terminal squeezed into it on each side. Puts those forms onto this spindle in this lathe, and then the carriage has a spool of very fine magnet wire that feeds out through a tip that looks almost like a 3D printing tip or of some sort. And through a combination of rotation of the spindle and moving back and forth of the carriage, this wraps the wire around the terminal and then moves over, does a rapid feed of winding the coil, moves the wire back and forth, so you've got nice even layers. When it's done, flips the spindle back to the other side, winds the wire around the terminal, moves on to the next one, does the whole thing, does this whole sleeve of 10 or 11 coils at the same time. And then all he's got to do at the end is come along with a pair of wire cutters, snip, 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 and he's got all of these coils perfectly wound, ready to go. Soldering later on is he looks like he's using a butane torch or something like that to burn the enamel off and then do the soldering. He's got there's hundreds of these coils ready to go. There's a lot of other 3D printed parts and doodads that make this whole thing work together, but just that tooling to make this all work, it was just incredible to look at, and I really wanted more details on that stuff. Hopefully Ricardo will get back to me at some point and tell us more about the backstory on how he came up with these techniques to build these, because I thought this was really cool.
Like, the art piece is really cool, but the machine that winds the coils is almost the same art piece for me. Like, it almost does as much for me in my nerd heart as the other one. And yeah.
Exactly.
I wish I had to wind enough coils that I needed a coil winding machine. First of all, just period. And second, this is the extra special coil winding machine because, like you said, it winds those funny. It does that extra little dance to wind those little terminals, and that's just lovely.
I feel like I played down the art piece. Yeah, whatever. Art piece.
Yeah.
Look at that tooling. And that's not at all the case. I thought the art piece was very, very cool all by itself and very satisfying in the way it sounded. What else is pretty cool is that Ricardo said that he's been reading Hackaday for like 19 years and that he actually learned English by reading our articles.
Oh.
He's from Brazil. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. That our writing helped him to learn English, and it's probably a limited subset of English,
weird
right?
subset of English.
It's a little specialized, but still nice to hear that we had an effect on him. So
That's awesome. I learned hacking by reading Hackaday, so what am I going to say?
right, exactly.
My first quick hack comes from Steven. Taylorator makes mischief on the airwaves. Normally, you think of an SDR as receiving the whole broad band of radio and then demodulating it in software. Here, he's doing that the opposite. He's transmitting the whole FM band all at once, and he's putting Taylor Swift on every channel. Do not do this at home, folks. It is absolutely illegal, but oh so funny. Anthony Francis Jones, inside vacuum fluorescent displays. This is neat because he takes apart those, blue-white vacuum fluorescent displays. And what I hadn't realized is that they're basically cathode ray tubes in reverse. There are some wires that emit electrons and then they slam into these fluorescent bits. So yeah, they're exactly like that. You might be saying, where's the super high voltage to attract the electrons? These only use 25 volts. And he gives the answer here. The wires are separated from the phosphors by about 2 millimeters. At 25 volts, that is 12.5 kilovolts per meter, just about the same as you get in a TV tube. Coleman JW2 paper tape with lasers. I love these backwards technology things. Back in the old days, you'd have a tape punching machine to punch the holes in your paper tape. These days, nobody's got that. But of course, you have a laser cutter in your basement. So he's taking the paper tape strip. There's written a Python script to put the right dots in it so that it can be read by, I guess, a paper tape reader. Or maybe he's just going to put them in a scanner and use another piece of Python code to read the data off. What do I know? Kids these days. And last up, my fourth of 3 quick hacks. A little pigment helps with laser glass engraving from R. Schön M. You can mark black on glass if you hit it with a titanium dioxide and glue mixture first. The titanium dioxide is a trick. It gets blackened and adheres to the glass. So if you have to make designs on otherwise transparent window glass, this is the way to do it.
Alrighty, first up for me is 3D print stamps and ink stuff to your heart's content with these tips. The Prusa blog put out a guide to making your own rubber stamps. And one thing that Donald failed to mention when he wrote this up was that there used to be stores that specifically did very little other than make rubber stamps, and they were the best stores in the world, hands down. You could go in and buy a rubber stamp. They'd take a couple of days to make it, but it come out great, and it was like boom, ka-chunk. You could put your stamp on anything at all. I used those when I was a photographer for copyright notifications. Now, why do that if you can just go off to your printer and print them? They have tips for different filaments, which ones work better than others, printing tips, de-stringing your prints because flexible filaments tend to be a little bit stringy when they're printed, and how to make handles and ink pads and all that stuff. Good stuff to look at. Next up, the Dwingeloo radio telescope in the Netherlands managed to bounce signals off satellites other than the moon. This was accomplished a couple of weeks ago, apparently. Unfortunately, I went to the site and the article is missing at this time. I don't know if that means they retracted it or if they're doing maintenance or something else. So just heads up on that. You might not actually, you might actually have a dead link on this article, but The accomplishment is interesting nonetheless. They managed to use a geosynchronous satellite in Earth orbit, obviously, and bounce a signal off of that and make an amateur radio contact on another part of the planet off that satellite. So they're not using any of the radio gear on the satellite, no repeaters, no anything like that. They're just physically bouncing a signal off of the chassis of the satellite, the solar panels, and all that stuff. It's very difficult to do, and it's very sketchy because the relative aspect of the solar panels and all that changes as the satellite is in orbit. But they did manage to do that. Hopefully that article will be back up again soon. And last up for me is DIY probe clamps to ease your PCB work. These are some 3D printed clamps that you can hold a probe into various places on a PC board. This is from 2048 bits, and they are a little bit on the weird side to print. I would think. In fact, there's a sort of a remix on this already available so that it's perhaps easier to print. I could see these as even being possibly flexure sort of print. You wouldn't need to have any springs or axles or anything like that. Just be able to print them all at once. But basically, this is a replacement for whatever you're doing right now to hold probes onto a PCB, which is maybe you're using a clothespin or you're using one of the helping hands or something else to hold your probes. These are a much better way of getting that job done.
All right, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I picked Al Williams's Forgotten Internet Part 2, Giving or Getting the Finger. And this is all about the finger protocol, which I actually remember fondly from my college years. This was a program that you could run on a mainframe that, when queried, would tell others, A, whether you're on the computer or not, and B, kind of what you're up to. There was an old Unix command, at least, called who, which would show you which users were active on a system. Does it still work on Linux? Hold on, I'm typing in who. Oh, it does. Elliot is using my computer right now. So who still exists? And the finger demon would read the who files and see if the user you're looking for was currently logged in. And then it would go and read a couple other files in their directory, the project file, which I never even used. I don't think I even knew about it, and the plan file. And the plan file, you kind of write down what you're working on right now, or funny stuff, or whatever you feel like. And then anyone who's looking for you, say it's one of your friends, wants to see if you're at the computer, maybe wants to talk to you about something, finger Elliot at whatever, and finds out that I'm online and that I'm in my plan. It says I'm working on my physics homework or something. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. I wanted to help him with that. And the plan file kind of formed this kind of impromptu, a lot of the same functions that kind of Twitter serves between nerds these days. It's like, what interesting projects are you working on? It lets other people find out about that. And that part of it I thought was really particularly cool, except of course that we were all too lazy to update our plan files when we were in college. And God, for the longest, mine actually included a joke from Blazing Saddles where the sheriff's like, we've got to go get him. And he's like, how are we going to get him? And he's like, wait, I've got a plan. Get him. And they're like, get him? That's your plan? And so my plan file for a long time was get him. And then on the line underneath it said, get him. That's your dot plan. And because it was a dot plan file. Oh, this was high humor back in the day, let me tell you. And the other awesome finger anecdote I have, Al almost brushes up on it in this story. The weird thing about this, of course, is that you could figure out who is currently online at any computer and figure out what they're up to. What they're up to was voluntary, and you could actually do a no finger command if you didn't want to be seen when you were online. So there was kind of some moderate steps toward providing a little bit of privacy here, but a lot of people had name and address stuff in their finger files, or their phone number, their office phone number, their contact information. And way back in the day, a friend of mine was starting up a business just out of college and wanted to recruit professors It was an expert witness testimony service, and he wanted to recruit college professors to give expert testimony. And the way he did this was by hitting every finger demon at every major university computer center he could find and sent these people all email. And this was back in 1994. And as far as I know, my friend is one of the first mass spammers ever. And the finger demon was his way in because he managed to get the usernames and accounts and department information from like all the major universities across America and just like blanket sent these people emails, rolled this into a huge database, into a successful business that lasted for 20 years, and he eventually sold. So voila, innocent times.
Wow. Yeah, this one brought back some nostalgia for me too, because I mean, my first real experience with the internet was when I had a Unix account in grad school, and so that would be 91 or so, 91, 92. And I do remember, being on that machine and doing the finger command to see where, if my friends were online or, my classmates were doing what they were working on. I remember, finding out the project and the plan files and populating those and never populating them again, probably. All this stuff, yeah, was really cool. And now it's too bad. I always wanted to set up a legitimate Unix server in my house so I could, where are my kids, are they online or not? But it never really happened. And so things moved on, and we all sort of moved into our own little world with social media and all that stuff. So a little bit of a pity. It was kind of a fun to all be on the same machine and be able to see what everybody was doing was pretty cool. But hey, time moves on.
Best comment on this article comes from 70s Jukebox, who points us to John Carmack's plan files. And apparently while he was at id Software, they used the plan files every day to kind of update what they were working on and use it to communicate themselves. There's a GitHub full of all of them, and they include things like John C. plan file 1996-0305.txt, basic zombie actions, added dog, fixed bug in QuakeEd that caused a crash while setting a bad class name, changed health stat to short fix and negative numbers, secret doors need to crush damage and return to open, negative health, fish have problems, cycle general updates and wasted bandwidth, etc., etc. Zombies need to change size when down. These are just lovely, and of course they track all of the progress they must have been making on Doom back in the day. So click through and give those plan files a look. That's a lovely history.
I'm looking at one that has armor color flash, gib death, grenade tweaking, and nail gun lag.
Crawl out of water, demon jumping, work on swimming, spinning gibs on floor. He didn't spell very well. Oh, well, whatever.
Yeah, well.
More coding, less spelling.
My pick this week is the FTC Take Action. Is time finally up for John Deere on right to repair? Jenny wrote this one up, and Jenny has, of course, had her finger on the pulse of what's going on with right to repair, especially as it concerns agricultural equipment and especially as it concerns John Deere, who seemed to be the primary focus of attention on the entire right to repair movement in agricultural equipment. And that makes perfect sense. Jenny has a history of family farming and knows these issues in and out, and knows very well that farmers have always been hackers. Farmers have always tried to, repair their own equipment, just out of necessity. You usually have very narrow windows for harvest, for planting, for applying fertilizers and everything else that has to do with growing food, because it's so dependent on the weather, and you may be in a place where you are only going to get 3 days in a row to cut down your crop of hay. And having a machine down at the exact moment that you need it is a very bad day, which is why farmers have always been very successful ones anyways, have always been very good at making do with whatever repairs will get them back on line. There seems to be some effort afoot to not allow anyone to do any repairs except for an authorized dealer. That's a big problem. And anyways, this whole thing boils down to, this thing's been fought out in the courts and in the court of public opinion for quite a while now. But it appears that the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC in the United States, joined by the state of Illinois and the state of Minnesota, are suing Deere and Company for this issue, for this right to repair issue. And basically, it doesn't actually attack the use, if Jenny's reading of the action is accurate, and I don't have any reason to think it's not, it doesn't really attack the use of DRM in and of itself. I mean, that's, companies do need to be able to protect their intellectual property. Instead, this suit goes to the matter of the heart of the matter, which is locking customers out of self-repair by restricting the availability of the specialized tools and software they need to actually make these repairs. And those repairs could, in some cases, be things like, firmware updates, retraining of sensors so that they, if you say you put in a steering wheel angle sensor on a combine, because it broke down, you put a new one in, well, you got to go through some sort of routine to calibrate that again, so it knows that so many pulses of the encoder, represent lock-to-lock steering, so it knows how to steer correctly. Well, you can't do that if you don't have the, the scan tool, and they'll only sell the scan tool to authorized dealers. So that means there's only a limited number of repair techs, and everybody's harvesting at once. Everybody's planting at once. So when something goes wrong, there's nobody around to do this work. And I think that's the basis of the suit that the FTC and others have brought against Deere. Whether this will succeed or not, who knows? In the current environment, it's hard to say what's going to happen. But if it does succeed, then that would be precedent for other areas of right to repair that might cover things like, 3D printers, cell phones, what have you. Everything else we've been sort of locked out by. Cars. I mean, everybody says you need a degree in computer science to fix a car these days. It's not true. Still, you do need access to tools. And if you can't get those tools, if the manufacturer also locks out anybody from making equivalent tools. So we'll see how it goes. And I'm sure Jenny will be up on top of it and let us know how it goes and what the ramifications are.
Yeah, like you said, this is all about access to the repair tools, and it'd be awesome if you could get your tractor repaired, at any old place instead of just the John Deere dealership. And it's, think about if it was that way with your car, if you had to take your car back to the dealership where you bought it. A lot of people do, but man, I promise you that's the most expensive place to get your car worked on. What's fun is that the public and the government has been chipping away at this for, 10 years now. And it is slowly starting to show fruit. And I think that's really, this lawsuit coming from the FTC is actually a really good sign. The other thing was that in 2021, John Deere, among others, had been, like everyone else does, had been using the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to say that there are secrets that they had in like the ECU and other parts of the vehicle computer were copyright secrets and you couldn't open them up. And in 2021, these all got the reverse engineering clause added. So there's an exemption for computer programs that control motorized land vehicles, including farm equipment, for purposes of diagnosis, repair, or modification of a vehicle function. And so that's now all no longer covered by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is a huge win. Actually, I'm looking down this list. There's 3D printers was in this one. Michael Weinberg petitioned to renew the exemption for computer programs that operate 3D printers to allow the use of alternate feedstock. This was the one where they were putting...
Oh, yeah.
They were putting codes on 3D printers' filament spools and claiming that these secret codes were a copyright and that reading them was a copyright violation. Man, this stuff is so shady.
It is.
Some of the bullshit applications of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act are just so bad. Like the anti-toner refill ones, you can't... Yep. Like, that has nothing to do with copyright. Copyright is, I wrote a story about vampires and you can't reprint my vampire story without giving me money. Like, copyright is, we write articles on Haggaday and you just can't steal them. Like, this is copyright. It's not, you can't fix your damn tractor. Okay, rant over. We'll get them.
Yeah.
We'll get them.
At some point.
That wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, drop us a line, tips@hackaday.com. And follow along with all the cool links, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And until next week,
Keep on hacking.
Well, let's start the What is my problem? I've been going on for days now, I feel like. Good, I'm going to have to cut all this in post, but we'll get there.
Oh boy, what are we going to say about this one? Okay.
It's time, but why? I can't. What?
Yeah.
It's been a long day.